I met Walt Disney just a year after he'd made Cinderella. And he invited me to come to his studio. And one by one, I met all of these, what they call the 9 old men.
The 9 old men, Walt's tour de force group of artists, all worked together on Cinderella. These were men at the top of the game.
They were the people who really saved Disney animation after World War II. There had been some wonderful animators before them who had contributed a tremendous amount to the creation of the Disney animation style, but they were the key figures in keeping the Disney animation style going from 1945 really up into the 60s.
They were so excited with the glory of what they had wrought, and they told all these stories about the making of Cinderella.
Walt Disney really knew what the strong sides were in the animators, and he cast them accordingly. The casting on Cinderella was really perfect.
Eric Larson and Mark Davis were equally skilled as draftsmen, and they were assigned the difficult task of animating Cinderella.
There are certain scenes in the film that when I think of the scene, I think of the person who animated them. When Cinderella wakes up in the morning, it's so much like Eric. Eric was our mentor when we started at Disney, and he was
a grandfatherly guy with a nice portly belly, and he would talk like this, and he was always sincere and very genuine and heartfelt.
And when you see that scene, you just feel everything is right in the world. And I feel like I felt back at Disney in the room next to Eric Larson when I'd go in and work with him.
I remember Eric Larson talking about the fact that he and Mark Davis, they didn't quite see eye to eye in terms of Cinderella.
All right, breakfast is served.
Mark Davis apparently gave her a more sophisticated quality, whereas Eric Larson went for a simpler character, and they had to somehow reconcile the two sides of the character. But I think that's what makes her interesting too, that she does have this down-home warmth to her. But there's also a certain intelligence and sharpness about her.
Maybe I should interrupt the music lesson.
And I think it has something to do with Mark Davis's approach to the character.
This is sort of a doodle sheet that Mark Davis did during the making of Cinderella, and you can see this is probably early on where he's analyzing her face.
So this is love.
Milt Kahl, who was the top draftsman at the studio, was always stuck with the princes. Very difficult to do these straight masculine characters without making them look silly. Milt Kahl also had scenes with the Duke and the King.
It's high time he married and settled down. Of course, Your Majesty.
Milt Kahl did these drawings of the king. Milt was always a master at hands. They were always so correct and very, very expressive.
Milt did the fairy godmother. That scene with the fairy godmother is unforgettable.
Good heavens, child. You can't go in that.
The fairy godmother has surprising warmth. There's this grandmotherly type, you know, who has a lot of softness. There's a lot of nice feeling to that character.
Everyone's talking about it. The whole kingdom.
Frank Thomas did the villain in Cinderella. The most hated villain of all the Disney villains.
Frank Thomas had done Bambi, he'd done The Seven Dwarfs, he did Pinocchio. All these wonderful, charming characters. And he said, I was amazed when Walt put me on to Lady Tremaine. But he said he must have seen something in my way of thinking that would work for this character.
Frank Thomas was anything but a wicked stepmother, but there was something always going on in his head. You'd go into his office and he would be searching for ways to communicate to you what he was trying to put into the scene. There was always some depth to the character he was trying to get.
Well, don't just stand there.
I think that Frank, the way he did the stepmother was absolutely the right way to do it. He worried some about it being too straight, but I think she had to be the way she was, because I think she's very frightening when she looks at you.
Ollie Johnston, Frank's best friend forever and ever, and his partner and collaborator in so many films, Ollie did the Wicked Stepsisters, who were so slovenly, so lazy, so ugly, so unappealing, that by contrast, Cinderella would look lovelier and lovelier.
Ollie Johnston didn't feel he was the best draftsman like, say, Milt Kahl was or Mark, and he couldn't analyze the scenes as much as, say, Frank did. But Ollie was very emotional. He just really worked from his heart.
Mother, do you realize what you just said?
Of course. I said, if.
The stepsisters were the broadest characters that I had done up to that point, certainly. Oh, a lot of scenes where I even went too broad. I remember one where Anastasia, she was smiling, you know, like that, silly smile. So I went real broad with that, thinking I'm going to get something really funny out of this. But finally, Walt called me in. He says, you know, she is a little bit ugly. Suppose you could fix that up.
Wolfgang Reitherman, born in Germany, came over here as a little kid. What Walt liked about him was his attitude. Wooly was a great suspense guy, and he thought a great idea for a scene is get that key up to Cinderella through that dizzying stairs setup that they had laid out.
I think that's one of the best sequences of suspense that we've ever had in a picture.
And it keeps building and building because we keep cutting back and forth. You know, the cat comes in the way, it's trying to stop them. It's like a Hitchcock film. It's unbelievable.
Ward Kimball probably had the most fun of anybody on Cinderella. He got the cat, Lucifer.
That was perfect casting because you could have never cast Walt Kimball on Cinderella. He would have fallen apart. He would not have enjoyed himself.
I didn't have to work making those very careful drawings of Cinderella and some of the other animators had to work on. And it was pure comedy, the old cat-mouse relationship. And my problem was to develop a cat that looked mean.
He had some funny stories about looking for a cat to be a personality like Lucifer, because they had mean cats and they had slinky cats and they had all different kind of cats drawn in the story sketches.
Walt came out the house here one day, and our six-toed cat we call Feetsy was rubbing up against Walt's leg. And he said, "For gosh sakes, Kimball, there's your cat. What are you worried about?" And that's what led to my conception of the cat.
At the time, he and I were playing in our Dixieland band, the Firehouse 5+2, and they'd always introduce Ward as the one who had done the mice in the Cinderella, and everyone go, "Oh!" Then St. Frank there did the stepmother. I said, "We got to get another picture here, Ward. I can't take any more of this."
Walt Kimball got to do what he's best at, not staying within the forms of realism, but breaking out of that.
This great quality of going from real to unreal, that's always in Kimball's work. He was a fantastic, unique animator. You can look at his stuff on the screen and know it's Ward Kimball.
Walt's masterpiece of all his work he's done at Disney probably is the sequence where the cat is confused by which cup is hiding one of the mice. That is such a crazy but spontaneous sequence. It's as good as anything Chaplin has ever done. There are these two animation styles almost going on in the movie, when you have something like the cat and the mice, and then you have Cinderella and the stepmother, who are very real and have all these subtleties.
It's very difficult to animate human figures and to mix them with animals. It's just difficult. And Cinderella really succeeds well in that area.
Lucifer, you mean old thing.
You only got that by men who had grown from doing Snow White through Pinocchio, through Bambi, and Fantasia, and finally were able to do Cinderella.
The financial condition of the studio was such that they couldn't pour the lavishness into the production that they had on Fantasia or Pinocchio. So what they did was they shot the entire film in live action, and they used this as a guide to do layouts for the film, for the cutting, for the way the action would flow into one another.
They'd shoot live action and they'd blow it up to animation-sized paper, and then they'd put a sheet of animation paper on it and draw right over it.
Some of the animators kind of, balked at that a little bit. They just like, I can do this, I don't need it.
If the live action was good, well, I used it, and if it wasn't, I didn't use it. And I'd use the best parts of it, and I'd use it to help me enhance something, But I still didn't like to use it.
It is arguable that this is a less creative way of doing things. But the Disney artists were not the sort of artists who would just mindlessly trace over the live action.
They knew it had to be filtered through an artist's mind. And they had opinions on things, how something should move, and when it wasn't moving right in the live action, they would change it, and that's why it turned out so good, because they had a very critical eye.
If you look at some of the photographs that were taken and then the photostats that were made of it, and then you look at the final animation, you can see that there's an enhancement that the animators brought to it. The animators knew that you have to go further in animation than you do in live action, otherwise it's going to look stilted. Look at Frank Thomas's evil stepmother. There's a look about her that reminds you of actress Eleanor Audley, but he certainly goes further in her poses and in the way that she gestures and the way that she puts her points across on screen.
And one more thing. See that Lucifer gets his bath.
Ward Kimball had the luckiest role because the rest of us were sweating under all these restrictions of the live action we'd shot. They didn't shoot live action for him, and he wouldn't have followed it in the first place.
I was always looking forward to the next scene because it was fun.
It took us around 2 years to do it with all the experimental work in story and shooting the live action and that. But once we started animating it, it went quite fast. And we probably did the whole thing in 6 months. We all knew that it was a good picture because you could see it from the time we were shooting the live action on it. If Walt had been right in his vision of what the audience wanted, well, we'd be in business, and he was right. They just loved the picture.